Welcome to another episode of Conversations with. Today is a history day on the Brandy Show because we're going to visit one of the most extensive and fascinating collections of University of Michigan athletic history on the planet. The Bentley Historical Museum in Ann Arbor is a hidden or underappreciated gem, in my opinion. If you enjoy the history of Michigan football, the Bentley is like Christmas morning for you. It's got great material on all Michigan athletics, but football is king, and the keeper of the kingdom is a gentleman by the name of Greg Kinney. He is the chief sports archivist for the Bentley. He has done an absolutely fabulous job over the years preserving the tradition and history of the program. The materials Greg has found over the years in the nooks and crannies of the athletic department are priceless. So is Greg's story of his journey down this path, and so is my conversation with Greg Kinney. Greg, first of all, the reason I wanted to talk to you and the reason that the Bentley Historical Museum in regards to Michigan athletics got on my brain is the fact that you guys are now putting on digital formats for everyone to watch if they want the old Michigan replay shows with Coach Bo Schembechler and yours truly. And that's what got my idea started to do you on a conversation. And how did that come about? And do you think it fits in your mission at the Bentley Museum about Michigan athletics?
Well, the story goes back a long ways to when we first acquired the Michigan Replay and the other videotapes from CTC Sports and Bob Lipson. And it was in 2001 when essentially the athletic department brought Bob Lipson's production internally when they got the new facility in Chrysler Arena. And as you know, Bob had been producing the Michigan Replay show since 1975. He was based up in Farmington Hills and worked with the Detroit TV stations. And we had been, working with the athletic department for a number of years. And we got a call from, it was Bruce Made at the time, and saying that, they were explaining that they're bringing all this in and that Bob had rooms full of videotapes up at his facility in Farmington Hills that he needed to do something with, and the athletic department didn't have facilities to hold them, and they wanted to know if the Bentley was interested, and it certainly fell within our mission to help document the athletic department or history at the university. And so a couple of trips, myself and a couple of students went up, we got a university truck and went up to the Farmington Hills place, and Ryan Hartley had everything boxed up, and he spent 2 days loading material in and bringing them back to Ann Arbor.
And that's the history of it. And the thing that's cool for me is that I'm on a lot of those tapes. I can go back and look at myself when I actually had hair.
Yeah. Well, that was, Bo looked a little trimmer and fitter in those first shows too than he did at the end.
Can you believe the jackets he used to wear, those plaids? Weren't those
beauties? Yeah. That's one of the things I enjoyed about him, just real timepieces, the fashion, and even the commercials are interesting to watch from the period.
They are indeed. Greg, I want to get started now with you. We found out a little about Michigan Replay. By the way, one of my conversations this season is with Bob Lipson, and we go through the history of Michigan Replay from his end. And how Bo, when he was asked to do a show once, said, in the old days, they used to have a combination show with Michigan and Michigan State called the Bump and Duffy Show. And they asked Bo if he would be willing to do that. And Bo's comment was, it's the Bo show or no show.
Yeah.
And that's how Michigan Replay actually was born. But back to you. Your description is a sports archivist, I guess. What exactly is that? And did you know that was going to be what you became in life as you started out?
No, not at all. When I came over to graduate school here at Michigan, I originally was in a straight history degree program, and then I went off and worked for a while and then came back. And in the meantime, I'd worked at Minnesota Historical Society for a few years. And so I came back and finished a master's degree in history and the Library of Science Archives program. And I began working at the Bentley while I was a student. And I worked on a few sort of grant-funded projects at the Bentley, one of which was with the old Michigan media television studio that the university operated. When they closed down, the Bentley acquired all of their film and videotape. And then about the time that project ran out, Bruce Made and Jack Weidenbach and Fran Bluen, the Bentley director, arranged a pilot project for the Bentley to come in and help the athletic department manage some of its historical materials. The Bentley had dealt with the athletic department for years, but it had been kind of an informal arrangement, and Don Canham wasn't real interested in getting a formal arrangement with the Bentley. But when Jack came in, and really with Bruce's encouragement, because he always liked to say that he was the one who was put in charge of history, and he wanted to pawn that job off on somebody else that knew a little more about how to manage that kind of stuff. So anyway, we did a 2-year pilot project right at the same time that the Schembechler Hall was being built and the Towsley Museum was getting established. And so we were very involved in helping find material for the museum and write text and find photographs and everything for that. And at first there were a lot of people in the athletic department skeptical about, seeing all their stuff move off somewhere else. A number of us were down. We did a survey of all the buildings in the athletic department, all the basements and closets and cubby holes that had material stored in. And one of the things we moved out, and this is Bruce's office at that time, was in the basement of the old administration building, which is now Weidenbach Hall.
I was there many times in Bruce's office down there.
Yeah, and so we had, one of the things they had was one room that was literally stacked floor to ceiling with football game films. And that place, it was occasionally flooded a little bit in the basement down there.
Yeah, I tell you a story about that. I'm doing reunions for my team, my class in 1971. And to be quite frank, I was the video guy. I was the only guy in the business doing that. And so my teammate says, hey, can you get some stuff? I literally went down there and played those old 16 millimeter 1971 coaches film videos and then transferred them to old VHS stock so that we could have something to watch when we had our reunions and, 15, 20-year reunions back in 81, 91 and all that stuff. And so I knew those rooms very well.
Well, yeah. So there were a number of us were down there, hauling the game films out, and people were looking, assuming they'd probably never see them again. But with working with, it was, who was Bruce's predecessor? Blanking on his name.
Will Perry?
Will Perry, yeah. We worked with Will Perry on the museum, and, we soon showed that we could find stuff, the records that we had faster than they could have found it in their own offices. So we've developed a really great relationship with the department over the years that we provide them kind of special service, and they've been great in sending material out to us. And that you mentioned the game films, that project we've been working on now for the last year and a half or so is actually digitizing all of those old coaches' films.
Wow.
And so we're about 2/3 of the way through it when the pandemic hit and closed everything down. But part of my working from home job has been reviewing those films and doing kind of quality control and doing some annotations. And in some of them, it's finding out which plays are missing. But it's particularly, sometimes they would make highlight films, and sometimes those clips would get put back in and sometimes not. And so you'd be marching down the field, and all of a sudden they're kicking the extra point.
Yeah, the touchdowns were always removed because they sent those out to the television news stations, and then they used them on their 11 o'clock or 6 o'clock news, and they never returned them. And with film, if you clipped it out of that 16 millimeter film and you didn't get it back, it was gone.
Yeah. Fortunately, we had multiple copies of some of them, and we also got the Alumni Association used to send films out to clubs around the country. So we had some duplicate copies from them. So we were able to restore quite a few of them. And a favorite story on that is some of the 1939-40 Tom Harmon era films.
Yeah.
Most of the touchdowns are gone from that. And I remember when we do have a highlight reel. We have like a duplicate negative that they'd made from from the highlight reel they compiled. And when Mark Harmon was on campus, when was that, 10 years ago, when they retired or unretired Tom's number?
Yes, I remember that.
And we had done a little exhibit at the Bentley at the same time, and Dave Brandon brought Mark out and looked at the exhibit and some of the material of Tom's material that Dave had arranged to come to the Bentley. And we were talking about that film, and Mark says, "Yeah, well, I remember watching that when we were kids, and we thought Dad scored a touchdown every time he touched the ball."
So he's got the touchdowns, right?
Yeah. So I've got most of them we have on a reel, and so we're working on kind of restoring them back to the original film as well. But it's nice to have that highlight reel too.
Oh, that's unbelievable. When do you think that kind of thing, when you get it restored, will be available digitally for Michigan fans to watch? You would have 1 million people wanting to see that.
Yeah. Well, we're looking to get some of the early game films online, maybe by mid-September.
That would be absolutely amazing.
Yeah. No, it's been an interesting project to work on. And many of the, especially in the earlier years, I presume it was intentional that they filmed at a higher speed rate. So when you play them back normally, it looks somewhat slow motion.
Yes.
And I mean, that was intentional to make it, for the coaches, so they could, when they're in their player sessions, they could easier to point out who was doing what right and what was doing things wrong. But there's some of them that are in amazingly good condition. We were worried, some of them had, especially those that were restored in those poor conditions. But we worked with a lab out of Cincinnati, actually now across the river in Covington, Kentucky, to do the transfer, and they did an amazing job on it. And some of them are, scratched and a little beat up, but generally they're in pretty good condition and a pretty amazing video quality, really.
Well, I will be one of the first guys when you get them up there. Make sure you let me know. I'll be watching some of that.
Put out an announcement for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful. Now, the word you used back when you're talking about how when Bruce Made had a memo to go out to Canham, I think about 6 or 7 years prior to you coming on board, and when Weidenbach took over as athletic director, he basically reused the same memo, and
right.
And Weidenbach said, "Yeah, I think that's the deal." So let's get Kinney in here and see what we can do. Now, here's the thing: when you say manage, the material you got had to be unbelievable. The amount, and from different spots. You have a story of finding something in a spot you never thought was imaginable, because that's where all this stuff was, wasn't it?
Yeah, we pulled some stuff out of the basement of the Hartwick building, the ticket office. And there was some stuff, can't see it now, but there was a coal chute that went down into the basement from the old days.
A coal chute? You found stuff in there?
Yeah, and there was a cement ledge along the outside of the building. And so we found some stuff stacked up on those buildings, and a few of the game films, or we presume may have been game films, were from the old nitrate film stock that deteriorates. And so we found a plastic bag with some of those in that we actually had to call the university hazardous material squad in to take them out of there. But there were things stashed in all kinds of little cubby holes all over the athletic campus. And
when you say manage to go through them all and catalog them all, that had to be monumental. How much help did you have?
Well, I did a lot, but I had a lot of student help over the years as well. So we kind of measure things in how many linear feet of shelf space it takes up. Yeah. And so our main athletic department collection now is about 400 linear feet of papers and photographs, or paper records, photographs. And then there's another file, which was referred to as the player bio file, where for many years the Sports Information Office kept a little individual file on not every player, but a lot of players. The earliest ones going back to the 1920s. And it might be anything from, the little fact sheet you filled out when you enrolled and telling what you did in high school and what your favorite sport or favorite TV show was and all that kind of stuff.
Do they still have those?
Oh, we still have those. In fact, one of the most popular things we ever tweeted out was the form that Jim Harbaugh filled out.
What did he say?
Well, he was a big, what was the TV show he was? He was
Rockford Files with Jim Garner.
Yeah,
right?
he was Rockford Files. He was a big Rockford Files fan.
He and I have had conversations about that because I was a big Rockford File guy too. And
his favorite band was AC/DC.
How about that?
And even on the form, he even drew in the little lightning bolt for the AC/DC sign. So.
Did he really?
Yeah. But there's another 200 feet of those. And plus we have records of the board and control, the main administrative records, which in large part are kind of fielding Yost records as athletic director, and through Fritz Kreisler all the way up through, we have some Tom Goss material. That's the most recent we have from there. And we have other materials like a personal collection from Fritz Kreisler and Harry Kipke, a lot of the coaches and other administrators. We've got some early records from Phyllis Hartwig and others, the earliest women's athletic program, kind of before it was merged into the main athletic department. So we have, that's not, and then on top of that is all the films and videotapes we have. Right. So it's physically one of the largest collections we have at the library.
Well, I think, to be quite frank, and this is what they say, is that in Division I athletics, it is the most extensive and biggest collection of athletic history and archives and documents of any Division I collegiate university program. And I would think you would agree with that, right?
Yeah, it is certainly not probably one of the biggest. Notre Dame has a very large collection, but a really interesting thing, this is when we were first getting started with the program, a guy named Murray Sperber, who has written a lot about athletic history and was a very big critic of Bobby Knight at the time he was at Indiana, but he wrote a book on Notre Dame football called Shaking Down the Thunder. And he talked about how Notre Dame for a long time really downplayed its archive, that they wanted to kind of de-emphasize it. They had the extensive material, but it was kind of hidden away. And he compared that, and this is it's not bragging on myself, but this is even before I was on the job, that he commented how open Michigan was with making its material available. Even, some of the not so nice stuff that we might have on a few things.
A few skeletons, huh?
Yeah, but he said that was almost unique at that time among college archives, that their athletic records were as open and available as the Michigan's were.
That's great stuff. What were your early challenges when this whole project was thrown on your lap? What were those early challenges? Was it just kind of organizing it all, or was it finding stuff and where to put this, where to put that? Because I think at one point, as most all of us do when we clean out a garage, there's some things you may have to throw out. You don't want to, but maybe you have to. What was the biggest challenge early for you, Greg?
Well, again, just kind of getting a grasp of the whole breadth of what was available. And certainly the sports information department was where the bulk of the material came from. But we were also, trying to get some business administrative records and additional records from the athletic director's office, and even like plant and facilities, because we wanted to, document the physical part of the athletic program too. So, we have some very good records on the building of the stadium and the building of Yost field house. And so again, just kind of the bulk of it, for one thing, was kind of overwhelming at first, but parts of it were, the sports administration offices were fairly well organized, so we didn't have to do lots of, complete discovery. We kind of knew what we were getting in boxes when it came over. Uh-huh. But there were other places, a few departments, where it was, looks like at some point somebody just simply dumped the file cabinet into boxes and put it in a corner and forgot about it.
For years, I'll bet.
Yes.
Yeah. I just keep imagining in my mind's eye, the imagery for me is, hey, here's a pile for Yost. Here's a pile for Chrysler. Here's a pile for Kipke. Here's a pile for Elliott. And then all of the administrators in between. It didn't go like that. I would be a lousy archivist, wouldn't I?
No, well, actually, you're kind of, the idea in the archive is you try to keep material in the order in which it was created, if there is any order. So we, want to keep our athletic directors' records, in basically the same type of filing system that they would have used, partly because kind of one of the archival principles is there may be evidential value in the way things were organized. And so we'll try to preserve that to the extent possible. But then other things, that we do really have to just impose in order that will be useful for us to manage and will be helpful to users to be able to find material.
And the other thing about it is I wanted to ask you, because you've put your hands on this stuff, and part of it is really old and preserving it is difficult. But through your years there, and you can go on as long as you want, because I find this fascinating. When you picked up a piece of paper, turned it over, I kind of think like Indiana Jones. Oh my God, here's the shield from the Knights Templar. We can find the Grail. What raised your eyebrows in some of the pieces of paper and pictures that you turned over?
Well, some of the things, like we found some of the early contracts for both staff and arranging games. And in the very earliest years, it was before there was an athletic director or department, really, when students really ran the whole show. The team manager was writing off to Albion and Oberlin and everywhere else, trying to arrange games. And, just to see what a small operation it was at that time. But so even when Charles Baird, who later became athletic director, he was the team manager in 1895 or 94, 95. And so he was, the one who really was putting the schedule together, doing all the management work at the same time being a student.
And you have records. You have records of him, making deals with the teams to come in and play. Yeah,
we have a separate collection of the Baird papers, and it's all out of his correspondence and other material. And that's really a fascinating collection, because he really talks about how just the organizing the team and when they were trying to hire the first coaches and stuff. So that's, in some ways, that's probably one of the more interesting. His collection is about 2 boxes worth of material, but it's a really rich collection for somebody interested in that period of football.
Well, I would imagine it is, especially when you're talking managers making up schedules where now you've got to make it up with a economist and a TV network.
Right, and a team of lawyers.
Yeah. Exactly. What about, again, go back to Yost. I mean, I know you've got some things on Yost, letters and things that he signed. Do you have anything on his negotiations, if you will, for the golf course and the stadium?
We have a lot on the stadium, both how his investigations that he did, thinking about how the design of the stadium. There's one, and it's kind of a scrapbook that was either he put together or was put together for him, of all the stadiums that had been built around the country. So he had the Yale Bowl and the Rose, what was it called, the Rose Bowl, but Minnesota's had built the stadium in 23. So he studied all of these stadiums, and there's even a picture in there of the Roman Colosseum.
No kidding.
Yeah, he went, did his research that far back. But he was a lawyer by training, but he had been very involved in building some power plants and dams, and as part of his kind of other career before he became athletic director. So he had a lot of experience doing construction work, and so he was really on top of both the design and construction of the stadium.
There are contractors involved in digging the hole and putting it together, because one of the things people love to hear about is the stadium costs this much as opposed to today's dollars. Did you have any of that communication from Yost and, say, contractors or builders?
Oh, yeah, there's complete, runs of bills and financial statements for all that. So we know exactly how much was spent on steel and concrete and, what the excavation cost and the cost overrun they ran into when it turned out that the water table was so high that they had real problems with water in the field and had to do a lot of extra drainage work. And so, all of that kind of material is detailed.
Was it detailed that he put extra pilings or extra concrete in so that he could build a second deck? That's quote unquote the legend. Is that, can you tell that from some of the records that you have at the Bentley?
I am not positive that there's anything that the depth says that, these pilings are put in for the purpose of later expansion. That's certainly what everyone has always said. And offhand, I can't think of a document that would specifically say that, but because his original proposal, as approved by the regents, it was for 72,000 seats, and right where you would literally walk in off the street and walk down. But Yost had envisioned a slightly larger stadium, and then they did for those first years. And they would, for the big games at least, have wooden bleachers around the concourse there, so that they could get up to 84,000 people. So, Yost, his original proposal was for more than 72,000, but 72 is what the regents finally approved. But I think Yost had in mind all along that it would be bigger someday.
Yeah. He was, again, one of those guys that was way, way ahead of his time. What about communications and things? I think my mind starts going back to Bo used to have a letter that Fritz Chrysler wrote him after he upset Ohio State in 1969. And it was really historical. And Bo used to use that letter in his speeches. Do you have any communication letters like that from coaches to coaches, from administrators to coaches, anything like that gives an insight into the human side of these great legends that Michigan has?
Yeah, we have quite a bit of that. Sometimes, like just for Chrysler in particular, we have some great stuff. We have a separate collection of Chrysler material, about 8 feet of material that covers both his playing days at Chicago and coaching Minnesota and Princeton before he came to Michigan. There's a kind of a scrapbook that was put together, and must have been about 1966 or so. After it was for an event, but anyway, a lot of his former players wrote letters to them, and they're all in this scrapbook. And some of them are just really moving letters about how much Chrysler meant to those guys, especially the 48 Rose Bowl team.
The Mad Magicians, the Mad Magicians. That's Bump and Elliott and Pete and all the rest of them.
Chappie. It's some really great letters. They're just talking about how much playing for Michigan and playing for Chrysler meant to them.
And these are all part of the Bentley and the Chrysler exhibit, if you will?
Yeah, they're all part of the Chrysler, what we call the Chrysler Papers, or Chrysler Collection.
Wow. Do you have the letter that he wrote, Bo, by any chance?
I think we do, but I can't say positively offhand right now.
Okay. What other things that you've kind of come across? Again, I want to get back to you've seen so much. You're such a fascinating character in regards to the museum, and all this stuff has passed through your hands. Is there anything else that's raised your eyebrows back in the day from a historical standpoint?
In one sense, there's so much.
I know there's a million. There's a million things, and you've probably told a million stories about it. Yeah. But I just kind of like to get, because people always ask me, because I played for him, and they say, "What kind of Bo stories do you have?" You've got not only Bo stories, you got Lloyd stories, you got everybody's stories, and going back to Chrysler and Yost and Kipke and Oosterbaan. I'm sure is Oosterbaan. Do you have a section on Benny?
We do have a small collection of stuff on Benny. He's not as big as Chrysler, but and of course he's kind of spread through, as a coach and player, he's spread through a lot of different eras and different records. That we do have a small collection of Benny's material as well.
Was there anything about Benny that was as a player or as a coach, as an administrator, that other than the fact that he was one of the, I think, players of the century when he was an actual player, but his impact on the University of Michigan and the kinds of things that he did and the kinds of things that are in his collection. Anything stand out to you?
Well, the one thing I get from some of the records, but it's just how much the players liked Benny, that he seemed to be a real players coach, as opposed to Chrysler, who was always, players liked him, but he was kind of aloof and didn't really associate with the players very much. And there's one story that the players, I think it was Bill Daly, who was the star fullback on the 43 team, All-American. And one player had written that the players used to refer to Chrysler as the Lord. That,
I love that.
Yeah. That, he was kept very separate from the players, but Benny was very much a players coach and was friend to the players. But one of the actually coolest things that we have, it's not in the athletic department per se, but Michigan Media, the old TV studio, had produced a little half-hour program about Benny. And the guy named, the producer of the show called me one time, was looking for a photo that they'd used there. And his point was just to show what a great natural athlete Benny was. And there was a picture of Benny from when he was like 3 years old, with playing the old hoop game, with just a steel hoop with a little stick that you would roll down the road.
Oh yeah.
Well, Benny had mastered that at the age of 2 or 3, I guess.
Oh, you're kidding.
And so that was kind of the opening sequence for the little show about Benny. It's about, that this guy was an athlete from the beginning. And he, obviously was one of the great athletes of Michigan at all time.
He was a fabulous athlete. I know Ron Kramer was a dear friend of his. And that's where I wanted to go next. Players who are quote unquote, legends. I knew Ron before he passed away. And the Wisterts and Gerald Ford, for instance, the numbers that are retired. Does the Bentley address that or have sections about those guys?
Yeah, we've got files on all of those people that kind of both. Some of it just news clippings, but so we have Kramer. I actually have just finished watching the 1956 football season, and so there's obviously lots of Ron Kramer highlights in there. And what an athlete he was is just amazing. And then to think of him being a champion high jumper as well, it just doesn't, for a bulky or a big tight end and center on the basketball team to also be a Big Ten champion high jumper just shows what an all-around athlete he was.
But, he was amazing. How about Gerald Ford? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things like at the Gerald Ford Library. Did they come looking to you to get some information on Gerald Ford so they could stick it in the library for him?
Yeah, well, we had lots of it, and actually at one time, the Bentley Library had Gerald Ford's congressional papers from when he was a congressman. Bob Warner, the director, had arranged for those papers to be at the Bentley because he was still an active politician. They weren't open for public use, but we were storing them. And then when the Ford Library, the presidential library, opened, then all of those materials were transferred to the Ford. But we have some material on Ford. He had the misfortune of playing center behind a two-time All-American. So his sophomore and junior year, he didn't see a lot of game time action. And then in 35, when he got his chance, he ended up being the most valuable player on the team. And we've actually found a very brief clip of Ford playing football. I'm never sure if there was actually any film of him, but we have a couple partial game films from the 1934 or 1932 season. It's 32 and 33. And a few of them, if you look real close, you can see Gerald Ford in a few plays. And we actually tweeted out a little clip here a few months ago of one play where he's on defense playing linebacker, and he knocks down the pass, and so you can clearly see the number 48 and tell that it's really Ford.
Yeah.
And we have no film from the 1934 season, which I don't know if it's coincidence because they only won one game that year, but for whatever reason, the games have not survived. Yeah.
Well, you know what? That's fascinating. That's priceless stuff, though, too, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Anything on the modern guys? I mean, I think of Desmond and Charles because they won Heisman's. Anything on the modern guys? I mean, we've talked history. History is so neat. And what you've got on file and in those boxes is just, like I said, priceless. But anything on the modern guys?
Oh, yeah, we've got huge files on Desmond and Charles for sure. from the sports information file, they would collect clippings in all the magazines that they appeared in and everything, and tons of photos. Probably should mention the great photograph collection we have. Somebody you knew, I'm sure, Bob Kalmbach.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was a university photographer for 60 years almost. And then in 1969 is when he really started covering sports, first for the News and Information Service. And then he kind of subcontracted or was a photographer for hire by the department and covered really all sports for Michigan. So from 1969 through 2001, he covered football, basketball, all the minor sports. And so for football, he would maybe shoot, 10 to 12 rolls of 35 millimeter film a game. For other sports, he might shoot a roll or even just a few frames, but that's the best documentation we have for especially the early women's sports. And, some of the classic photos of Bo and Anthony Carter, are
right.
Bob Kalmbach photos. And then, so Bob Kalmbach, gave all his negatives to the Bentley through the athletic department. So we have, just a tremendous source for photographs for that period in history for sure.
And you've got photographs and documents, but the other thing you have is you have actual physical things like old footballs and helmets. How did those come about? And how did you categorize those? And where are people able to get and see those, if you will?
Well, actually, we don't have very much of that kind of material. We're an archive, not a museum.
Uh-huh.
So we don't collect too many three-dimensional objects. The athletic department itself has a collection, some of which is on display at Housley, and they have some others in storage. But occasionally we do get something in that's just too good to pass up. About a year ago now, a woman came in and just walked, her and her son, an elderly woman and her son came in, just walked in the front door, and the receptionist called, said they had something they'd like to donate to the university. And so the receptionist initially called another person who's what we call our field archivist, who handles going out and collecting material. So April McKay went up and met with a woman, and she had what she said was a genuine Tom Harmon helmet. So April looked at it, and then she called myself and my colleague Brian Williams, who's another great sports fan and collector himself. April called us back to come up and say, well, we got a woman with a Tom Harmon helmet. And we were initially kind of skeptical because, I forget, but sometime in the 90s, there was a reproduction Harmon helmet made.
Yeah, I remember seeing the ads for it.
Yeah, and so every once in a while, somebody, I've got this original Tom Harmon helmet. And he said, oh, no, actually, you really don't. But anyway, so he went up to look at his helmet, and he got there, expecting the old leather with a yellow winged helmet on it. But it turned out to be a helmet that had red and blue stripes, front to back and side to side. And he said, well, that's not a Michigan helmet. But then what? He said, but look inside. And there in Tom's unmistakable penmanship was written on the headband, T. Harmon. And if you look real close, you could see kind of stamped in the leather was T. Harmon as well. And so, well, it looks like it's a Tom Harmon, but it's certainly not a Michigan helmet. So we did some quick research and determined that it was a helmet from the college all-star game, when the college all-star team would play the defending NFL champion in August and so we figured, well, this is 1940, but then we discovered that Harmon is probably the only person that ever played in that game twice as a college player. So he played in the summer of 1940 after his graduation, or the summer of 41. And then he went off to, serve in the war. And when he came back, got out in 43, this was the Chicago Tribune sponsored this as a charity event. And so Tom had been the Heisman Trophy national football hero to the nation. And then he became kind of a war hero because, being shot down twice and surviving, getting out of China, escaping there. Anyway, so the promoters of the event were looking for some more publicity. And so they got Tom to come back and play again in 43. And so we're not sure which game that's from, but it's pretty definitely the Harmon helmet.
What a find, huh?
Yeah, but then the other kicker to the story is that the woman who brought it in, her husband had been active in sort of the Michigan High School Coaching Association and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And there was a meeting of some sort in Grand Rapids that he was at, and his name was Schultz, spelled S-C-U-H-L-Z. And Germany Schultz, the great player from the Yost era, was still very much around Michigan football. And he was at this meeting, and he says he was so tickled to find another guy that spelt his name the same way that Germany says, well, here, I've got something for you. And so he gave this guy the Harmon helmet along with an autographed picture from his playing days. So
oh my gosh.
We do have kind of a chain of custody of the helmet too.
So you got the provenance, as they say.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fascinating. One last question. John Bacon, who has written many, many books, and I know has been to the Bentley a lot and sends a lot of his students over there, says that the difference between looking at stuff online and actually getting your hands on it and touching it is a different experience. And I know you had commented on that a little bit too. How do people get the opportunity to experience this unbelievable history that you have over there in Ann Arbor?
Well, someday, sooner than later, we hope, we'll be back in the building. And we're open to the public, so anyone can come in. There's just a simple registration procedure. And we have what we call a closed stack library. You can't go and browse through our material, but we have inventories and descriptions of all the collections. And so you can request material and we will bring them out for you to see. And it is, we have a lot of images online, like all the old team photos, and they're great. But to see those big oversized photos from the 1880s and 1890s is really a different experience than just looking at them online.
I'd imagine it is. I might even have some stuff for you, actually. I need to talk to you about that. I did some interviews with, like, the guy that scored the first touchdown at Michigan Stadium, Kip Taylor.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I actually have him on tape telling me about that moment. And I was going to use some of them in an audio book, but I might be in touch with you. And I have some old game plans that Schembeckler put together that
sure.
were in boxes that were thrown in my garage at one point. So you and I may have to talk.
All right.
Sound like a plan?
It does, yeah.
Last question then. Michigan Replay. That how do people go about watching that? There's a link or something that you can go and actually pick which show you want to watch in which season, right?
Yeah. So what we had done is we've done just part of we did from 75 to 1992, which were the ones that were recorded on the old 3/4-inch U-matic videotape.
Yep.
And we did those because those were the most endangered people, just from the age of the tape. They were beginning to degrade, and so we needed to get those done as quickly as possible. So we have those done, and depending on finances and other things, we'll eventually work our way through all of them. But we have what we refer to as a finding aid, which is the inventory of the collection. And so it's hard to describe how to get to them. But through the Bentley Library website, if you go and search Michigan Replay, you'll come to it's a listing of all the shows that we have with a brief description of, naming the host and what, there was usually a review of the previous game and a preview of the next game. And then it'll list who the guests were or what topics were discussed. So if you're looking for a particular person, you may be able to find them, or, looking for a specific show, you can click directly on that. And they're hosted through the university's information technology services web streaming facility. And so we load all our material there, and it's provided there, free of charge, open to anyone.
For all your years, and you're still going strong now, I'm not going to tell anybody that you're not ready to continue this whole effort. Because I don't think when you started this deal, you thought, I'm going to retire here and I'm going to have all the. Give me your impressions on what this career has been for you.
Yeah, well, it was certainly nothing I had planned on. I came to Michigan originally studying American colonial history, and I was a sports fan, but not a diehard Michigan fan when I got here. And in fact, when they were, initially hiring for the position, there was some discussion, well, does the person need to be a diehard maize and blue fan? And I said, well, actually, it may be better if they're not totally. Because, like you say, there's some things that don't make the cut for being preserved forever. And so it's the difference between, a hobbyist avid collector and looking to build a collection that will document, the important things and sometimes the less well-known things about the athletic department. And so particularly, we document all sports. Football, of course, is the dominant sport, both in the bulk of material and the number of users we get. Are certainly football is the most popular, but our mission is to document all sports and activities around the athletic department.
Well, you've been fabulous at what you've done, and I can't thank you enough for joining me on Conversations with, Greg.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
I urge you to take a trip to the Bentley if you get the chance in Ann Arbor and just browse some of the rich history of the university's football program and athletic department. Greg Kinney's work at preserving and organizing this vast collection is nothing short of miraculous. To whet your appetite, you can get to the collection online at bentley.umich.edu. And if you want to watch vintage Michigan replay shows with yours truly and Bo Schembechler and Gary Mueller and Lloyd Carr, just search Michigan Replay Video Collection on Google. Keep an eye on my Facebook page, Jim Brandstatter76, and my Twitter account, @JimBrandstatter, for more information on upcoming episodes of Conversations With. You can also find them on all of your favorite podcast platforms. You can also get to thebrandyshow.com or jimbrandstatter.com and navigate your way to both Season 1 and Season 2 episodes of Conversations With.